Hello and welcome to another episode of AI Security Ops with our illustrious panel, Mr. Derek Banks, Mr. Brian Furman, and of course, myself, Joff. It is great to be here again on this fine fall day on the Eastern Seaboard. Of course, before we get started, I need to say that this episode is brought to you by Black Hills Information Security. If you have a need for performing an assessment of some kind of application that involves AI, whether it's a local AI model deployment or an application that has integrated AI into the application itself, we would be happy to help. We actually have skills in this area, and we do quite a lot of work in the space. So please do get in touch with us just by visiting our website, blackhillsinfosec.com, and filling out the contact form. Today's episode is going to be some question and answer action from our listeners, which is a growing list now, which we're very thankful for. So thank you for tuning in and subscribing. Let's jump right into it. On our first question, and I'm going to skip our very first one. I'd like to ask the second one because I really like this. So the second one is, I know that you guys are doing LLM red teaming, and I'm not sure if you want to answer this, but what would you recommend as open source tool or tooling for such a thing? So let's talk about that. One of you guys pick it. Brian, Derek, I don't mind.
Well, I think the first thing, and I'll make the comment and then hand it over to Brian, is that, I think us as penetration testers and red teamers, we tend to go look for the tool first before we think about the problem. And, at the moment, when I'm doing LLM like red teaming, the vast majority of the time, it seems like it's been like a chat bot. And so standard web app tools apply. To which case I don't use an open source tool. I have a professional copy of Burp Suite. And I think it's worth the money if you're going to be doing web app testing. And I know the question was specifically about LLM red teaming, but I think that in most circumstances, your LLM red team is really going to be part of a web app test.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. They are so often wrapped inside of a web application with some sort of interface through to AI to query the AI. In fact, Derek and I are doing a test right now where that is exactly the case. Dr. Furman, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are some different tools that are out there. You've got like Pirate and Garrick and Deep Team are some of kind of the main open source tools that are out there right now for LLM red teaming. But when it comes to doing like actual like client-facing engagement, kind of like Derek is mentioning, it's a lot more of kind of traditional tools that we'll tend to use during those engagements. Even with the prompting portion, a lot of manual prompting. I mean, if we did have a client, I would say, who was very interested in getting basically a scorecard for the safety aspect of things in terms of, biases and toxicity and things of that nature that aren't as related to the security aspect, then certainly probably pull out a tool like Garrick or Deep Team so you could at least give kind of a scorecard, if you will. But really, when it comes down to it, it's more of just kind of your traditional web app pen test tools and approaches.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. But true, when you get to the topic of specifically prompt injection and jailbreaking and making the AI do things that it shouldn't do, which is a feature, by the way. I think this is going to sound weird, but I think the best tool, and I've said this before, is a spreadsheet. Just grab your prompts that you're going to try, stick them in a spreadsheet, stick a column on there, good, bad, or otherwise, and go to town. Of course, there are resources out there. We know Pliny the Prompter, Eldius Plinius, Elder Plinius, is that what it is? Anyway, he's got GitHub repos out there that have awesome prompt injection and jailbreaking examples, and Libertas, I think, is the name of his GitHub repo.
Yeah, I seem to craft mine on the fly. I'm not saying I don't have a small repo of things that have worked, but I don't know. I kind of find it fun to build the prompts from scratch. But I will say that Brian hit on something. Like, I look at Garrick, like it claims that it's the Nmap for LLMs, and I guess you can make that argument. But as someone who's used Nmap, I mean, extensively, right, throughout my career, like, I don't know, because it's really just focused on the safety aspect, which might be important to you, right? And then you look at something like Pirate, and I think Pirate is very handy if you need to automate a bunch of prompts and test and like be a little bit more, what's the right word? I want to say robust. I don't mean it that way, but more of like you have to scale, right? And so I guess it just depends on the tool and the situation, I think.
Yeah, one of the things about some of these tools that we should also point out is some of these tools are actually leveraging large language models to attack other large language models, right? So there is an element of that, of sort of pitting the AI against the AI, which I find kind of ironic and amusing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I used Pirate a while back ago to do like the first 7 levels of Lakera in like, I don't know, 30 minutes. Maybe probably wasn't even that, right?
But it didn't attacks.
It didn't get me to learn anything, right? Other than I made a Python, like I made some Python that went and did the thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But let's hit another question. I'll let Dr. Furman ask the next one.
I scroll down here. Let's see. How do you threat model an LLM system?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question.
I don't know that it's any different than threat modeling any other IT system.
Yeah,
at least from
I was
my
about
experience.
to say that too. Yeah, I think that's very true. Their methodology.
So how do we do that?
Microsoft has a threat modeling methodology out there from years back. It's called Scribe, I think.
Maybe. I don't know.
So I guess hang on. I'm going to look that up really quick.
I mean, as you're doing that, I guess it was one of those things I just sort of learned coming up through the InfoSec ranks, so to speak, is, how do you threat model a complex system? And so, I mean, the first thing that I would ask is, do you have a map? And because if I was going to threat model an internal network, just as the large internal network, I would ask the folks that were asking for the threat modeling, well, do you know where all the ingress and egress points are? Where's all your protective and your detective sense systems? Have you got all of your business to business connections monitored? And so I guess, I would start with traditional threat monitoring. Like, what are the inputs and outputs? Like, what user data can go into the system? What are all the components? I mean, right now, Joff mentioned we were on a test, that it's a very complex platform. It is an application platform, not just an application.
Yeah.
And so just taking time to get familiar with how data flows in and out, what the purpose of the system is, and then thinking like a hacker, like, where can I break it, right? Or what can I do? How can I do something unintended that the developers did not intend for me to do, right? Like, for example, giving me access to a system with Jupyter Notebook. Well, my first thought as a data scientist is, oh, great, this is going to be great and productive. My first thought as a hacker is, well, there's command injection, right? So...
Yeah, just to correct what I said earlier, Microsoft's threat modeling methodology, which I find to be a nice acronym, is STRIDE. Which stands for spoofing.
That's right.
Yeah, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. I think a methodology like that is a perfect way to apply to AI or anything else. You can totally use something like STRIDE and think about it in those terms. It's really no different than any other software system that you might be looking at.
Oh, just say, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's it's kind of taking a holistic approach to it, not just the LLM, but what is the system that the LLM resides on? What is it? What are the systems that it interacts with? Who are the users? How do they access the system? What is the data that it's processing? And looking at all those from the LLM specific standpoint, I would say it's really what I usually say. It's really more about the trust boundaries around the LLM in terms of what can the LLM actually access. I mean, the LLM itself is a standalone. Again, unless you've got, unless you're storing set of information within the system prompt, or you're really concerned about the safety aspects of whatever. The LLM itself isn't necessarily super interesting, in my opinion, from like the security standpoint. It's what it can. It's those trust boundaries that are put around the LLM and what it can interact with.
That's exactly right. And you very, very quickly get into agentic once you start talking about those trust boundaries and what it can interact with, because it's when you connect LLMs to external world via some sort of agency mechanism that you end up having to truly threat model things. Otherwise, the LLM is basically operating in isolation, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's move on. I'll let Derek ask the next one. Derek, select a question from the list, sir.
Here's one. Which AI hallucinates the most?
So I think
I feel
that
like it's a trick question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that question is being asked in the context of the frontier models.
I would assume so. Let's
Yeah,
limit it
we'll make that
to
assumption.
frontier models and or local models, because I know that it seems like in the security community, at least based on the last while, just getting back from Wild West Hacking Fest, is like hackers still be afraid of frontier models for some reason, right? It all has to be like local, and I'm not sure that I agree, but anyway, so yeah.
Well, I'll give an answer. The answer is all of them, because I think we've said this before on the show. Sometimes we've certainly talked about it amongst each other. But if you look at the self-attention and multi-layer perceptron architecture of the transformer design, right, which is usually a decoder transformer style model, is very common today. They all are in the business of calculating word associations and resulting in what's called sentiment vectors that get interrelated with each other through very large matrix math. And so the net result is, when you are doing these word associations and sentiment analysis via the self-attention heads and the multi-layered neural network in the transformer architecture, the result is a probability distribution for the next word prediction, depending on what you're actually looking at. That probability distribution can be flattened out via a dial we call the temperature dial. In many cases, the temperature dial is usually set up a little bit so that the LLM appears to be more creative. And that, of course, can result in this hallucination effect. But it's really a feature of the technology. It is not something that you can say one is better than another. Some of the dials that you set, especially that temperature dial, can make that probability distribution a little more direct, a little less flat, and can reduce that hallucination rate. But ultimately, the technology is ultimately susceptible to hallucination, regardless of what model you're using.
Yeah, certainly. You're going to find it with all of them. And, I just Googling around over here on the side and seeing if I can find different benchmarks. And you can find different benchmarks that say different things. The first one I pulled up showed like roughly a 1% hallucination rate for a lot of the models. But this other one is showing 17% for some and 45% for another. But I mean, here's the thing is this is like a long time ago, a friend told me when I was talking about like GPU benchmarks, he said, well, there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's benchmarks. And that's the thing is that, yeah, because I mean, especially with stuff like this, it's hard. I mean, you can tailor benchmarks differently, and it's hard to encompass performance for all the, every possible scenario, right? And so just because they perform one way on a certain set of tests doesn't mean that that's a generalization against all aspects and all performances that you're going to look at. And I think really when it comes down to it, that, yeah, I mean, like you said, Joff, I mean, it's just how they're going to work. I mean, you're likely going to end up with hallucinations from any of the models. I mean, in general, usually the smaller models are probably going to be a little bit more prone to it. The older models, I mean, as they get improvements, you'll see less hallucinations, but
yeah, I mean, the other thing that does factor into this is the kind of filtering that the different providers are actually layering on top. So if you're using it through a web interface, there's likely some sort of output filtering going on, and that output filtering might have any number of sets of rules that look for hallucination effects, or might be throwing some of the output through another LLM. So you're going to see some variation because of that. If you're using the model via an API, which a lot of us do, then they're basically going to perform very similarly, because that API is something that you control. The additional filtering would be something that you would have to implement, which is going to make the situation a little bit different.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to take a little bit different of a stance and answer it real quick. Like, what do you consider to be a hallucination? Like, I recently asked ChatGPT to do some text summary for me, and long story short, it gave me some bullet points, what I asked for, and one of the bullet points was slightly off, and you could infer it from the type of material and its bullet point, and I'm being intentionally vague, right? But since it was slightly off and I didn't agree that like my original content had that exact kind of thing in it, is that a hallucination? I don't think so, because if I was sitting next to my coworker and they hallucinated, I would think that I asked them a security question and they started talking about baseball or something like that, right? And so that's not what happened. So what is a hallucination? And then I'll just end and say, what I've been telling folks, I feel like that hallucinations in general have gotten a little bit more minimal over the last year or so, just in my anecdotal usage. Do I still occasionally get something that's not quite right? Sure. But I haven't got a straight up hallucination from a frontier model from my very specific prompting in a very long time. And so, I don't expect that, the large language model to always be correct. I also don't expect my coworkers to always be correct. Just like you two don't always expect me to be correct, right? Listen and think and make a decision. And don't forget that AI is just a tool. I mean, we call it artificial intelligence. It's just because we don't have good words for saying things. Like, it's not a person. It doesn't think, right? You put data in and data comes out. And
I mean, inaccuracies, which is really what hallucination really is. It's very subjective, right? I mean, first of all, it's that's your point. That's part of your point. And I think the other thing that definitely puts even more variation in this is most of these frontier models, especially through their chat web interfaces, are doing some sort of retrieval augmented generation as well. They go out, they look things up, they have some agentic tools. And so it's going to change that hallucination sort of effect. I don't really like the term, but if the AI is purely doing next token word prediction, then you are certainly going to have that inaccuracy effect that's going to occur. All right, let's move on. I'll ask the next question, seeing as it's my turn. The next one I would like to ask is, what about user prompt privacy? Are prompts stored, shared, or could they leak?
So I would say the answer is it depends.
All of that. But there's a caveat. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're talking about interacting with the chat, interacting with the chat interface, then you got to look at the specific provider with which you're dealing with and what their privacy policies are. Are they storing the prompts that you're using? What's their encryption like? What's their data retention policy? And just everything kind of surrounding that, because it's going to be very provider specific. With that said, I would just assume personally that most of the things you put in there probably are being stored unless it says otherwise. Now, if you go to interact with an API, or interact with a chat system through an API, oftentimes those are ephemeral and are not stored. And you can see that within privacy policies of different providers, especially within Azure Foundry. They'll just flat out tell you that they don't store anything that comes through the API. I mean, you might be able to click to store it, or you might be able to store metrics, but by default, it's not stored. However, though, I mean, if you've got a chat window open and you can see the chat history on the side, then obviously your prompt is being stored somewhere, especially if you're not running a local model. And so I would just, with any data, you want to be careful about what you're putting in there, and you want to be careful about cleaning up after yourself, and also who you're entrusting that data to and what their privacy policies say.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts here. There is, first of all, a marked difference between the free, bunny ears quotes here, version of these tools versus the commercial paid subscription. And you have to look at the terms of service, first of all. When something is free, aka Google Mail or something like that, more than likely, your data is the product, right? You're being milked for information that they're going to use in further training in the case of AI chatbots, that kind of stuff. So free is not always free. And that's something that we all should be aware of. When you get to the commercial service side of it and you're using API keys and so on, things change significantly, and you should absolutely have the terms of service, look at it, examine it in detail, have your legal department examine it, and look carefully on what's going on. And then the other point I'd like to make is when you are using a chat interface via a web app, it is very common for a chat session to be a concept here. And when you start up a chat session, it means that the history of your prompting in that session is going to continually be placed into the context window of the LLM for the duration of that session. And that means that data is being stored somewhere and to enable that as part of the application. So you need to be cognizant of that. And it's why, some discussion that we've been having internally a lot is, hey, you can write tools using the API and an API key. We have a commercial subscription, et cetera. So you don't have to go through that chat interface. There's a misperception, I think, that floats around when it comes to the frontier LLMs that you always have to use that chat web interface. You don't. They do API access deliberately. So think about terms of service, think about all those things, and I think you can get yourself to the right answer for you in your organizational context.
I guess I have two thoughts. One,
Yep.
From a personal usage kind of thing. One of the things I've told my kids forever about the internet is the internet's a giant pool, and if you put data out there, it's like peeing in the pool. Once it's out there, you can't unpee in the pool, right? Like data going out to the internet, you might want to just consider just as in general, it's no longer your data. You put it somewhere. They might say they're going to keep it safe. I mean, ChatGPT had an issue recently about shared chats being included in Google search results, right? So, oops. I mean, those things are always going to happen. And the second one is, why would storing chat history always be a bad thing? If it was an enterprise class LLM like chatbot that I was running for an organization, chances are we probably do want to keep those prompts and store them, right? For our own auditing purposes. So yeah. I think, again, I think your situation kind of, it depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, you're kind of making me laugh inside and then feel very sad at the same time because I have literally Googled around, using my name and found, posts from discussion forums that I participated in the mid or early 90s. Right.
It's still out there.
It's still there.
In the pool.
And then I look at them and go, oh my God, I was so stupid. Anyway, let's go to the
Not
next
stupid,
question.
Naive.
Yeah, naive. Oh, yeah, however you want to put it. The next question, I'm older and wiser, I suppose. The next question I'm going to pitch for Dr. Furman here. Pick one for us, Brian.
Let's see. Should red teamers be disclosing AI usage in client deliverables?
That's a good one. I think I would recommend, red teaming implies that you're working for a company of some sort. And if I were working for a company, like I do, and we do here at Black Hills, I would start with an AI usage policy. You're likely already being asked for that stuff from some clients, right? And I wouldn't, the question kind of implies that using, AI technologies as a red teamer is a bad thing. I don't think that it is. I think that it's a very big time saver for me. Oh, good Lord. Things scripts I used to manually try and write or wouldn't write because I knew it would take me forever. Literally just ask, Claude. Those one-off things it's amazing at, right? So, I think that yes, you should disclose them, but my recommendation and what I'm trying to push for here at BHIS is that yes, we do use frontier models, and yeah, we have an enterprise account and we are going to use to some extent your data, not your confidential data, but if I'm testing a web app, I might take the JavaScript and ask ChatGPT to help me figure out what it means, right? And so, I would say a tiered approach. And if Jason Haddix, if you ever watch this, I took this from you. I'm going to use frontier models. And if you don't like that, Mr. Client, then I'll use local models. And if you don't like that, then I won't use any, but likely you're not going to get as good of a test as we step down through those options. You want me using frontier models. And in fact, John Strand recently stated something to the effect of there probably is going to come a time where if we're not using AI technologies, that's going to be looked at negatively.
Yeah, that was actually the point that I was going to make. I think the script is flipping, and it's flipping very quickly. To the there was this initial counter reaction from a lot of our customers, friends, colleagues, peers, etc., that would be like, "Oh my God, AI, scary! Why are you using that?" But now I think the narrative is flipping, where our customers, our other colleagues and peers in pen testing, are going to start asking the question, why are you not using it? I mean, because it's actually becomes a competitive advantage, and in experienced hands becomes a very useful tool. And it's very important to highlight the words inexperienced hands, because again, high quality in, better quality out.
And the tool part, like, don't ever lose sight that it's just a tool. Like, I can use a wrench and I can tighten down, the bolt, or I could beat it against the wall to no effect, right? Like, it's just a tool.
That's right. Any final words on that one, Brian, before we wrap it up for today?
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it there. So certainly, I think if you're using AI tools, then if you're like us and you write out your methodology, then obviously you want to mention that that's what you're doing. So that way, if someone else wants to know how did you do what you did and how can they reproduce it, it's good for them to know. I mean, if you're just using AI to ask questions, I mean, like, do you really need to say that? I mean, it'd be like saying, oh, I need to stay every time I used Google or whatever search engine you prefer, or whatever other thing I referred to, right? I mean, that's a bit silly, but if you're using the tools, like, absolutely. And, I think it's great that we are seeing that shift finally on the offensive side, that people are being more accepting of the practices of using the tools. We've seen it on the defensive side for a while, where all the companies wanted to tout that they got the AI and machine learning and everything, and people were all ecstatic about that. But for whatever reason, on the offensive side, people have been much more adverse to adopting it. But I'm glad to see that we are moving that way, because it just means that people are going to be more efficient in their jobs. They might uncover things they might not have seen before, and overall are going to deliver better results to the clients in the end.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to point out real quick is that, like, I got you here, is like, I still firmly believe of human in the loop deliverable, right? Because I would not at this point recommend taking straight AI generated stuff and not reading through it and including it in the report. And I think there was a big consulting firm here recently. I think they covered it in the news while it was Hacking Fest, the live news. I can't remember which one it was. But essentially, it's a $400,000 contract, and they're not, like, the client's not paying them because they're claiming they just generated the whole thing with ChatGPT, AI slop included, right? And I think definitely still at this point, all client deliverables, there should be at least one, maybe more humans in the loop on the AI output.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that brings me to a great segue to wrap up the show. So, thanks everybody for listening today. And just remember that, we are moving from a world that has been prior, a world of deterministic software technology, into now a world that is probabilistic software technology. And that brings a lot of uncertainty with it, and all of the pains that we exactly built this show around. So thanks for listening. Be safe and keep on prompting out there.